We're going to read the third story, it's called Hatchet by Gary Paulson. It's going to go with Night of the Spadefoot Toads and Shells. This is probably my favorite book historically. So I read this when I was in fourth grade, I think, and have absolutely loved it ever since. And so I hope you will enjoy this chapter of it. I strongly encourage you to check it out on Sora if it's there, or any other library website you might be able to find it on. All right, let's get started. Hatchet by Gary Paulson. As I'm reading, I'd like you to listen for the words wilderness, gingerly, and survival. Those will be our vocabulary words today. Brian is on his way to visit his father in northern Canada when the pilot of the small single-engine plane in which he is flying suffers a fatal heart attack. Forced to crash land the plane, Brian suddenly finds himself alone in the Canadian wilderness with only a hatchet to help him survive. At first, he thought it was a growl. In the still darkness of the shelter in the middle of the night, his eyes came open and he was awake, and he thought there was a growl. But it was the wind. A medium wind in the pines had made some sound that brought him awake. He sat up and was hit with the smell. It terrified him. The smell was one of rot, some musty rot that made him think only of graves with cobwebs and dust and old death. His nostrils widened and he opened his eyes wider, but he could see nothing. It was too dark, too hard dark, with clouds covering even the small light from the stars. He could not see. But the smell was alive and full in the shelter. He thought of the bear, thought of Bigfoot and every monster he had ever seen in every fright movie he had ever watched, and his heart hammered in his throat. Then he heard the slithering, a slithering, brushing sound near his feet, and he kicked out as hard as he could, kicked out and threw the hatchet at the sound, a noise coming from his throat, but the hatchet missed, sailed into the wall where it hit the rocks with a shower of sparks, and his leg was instantly torn with pain, as if 100 needles had been driven into it. Ah! He now screamed with the pain and fear and skittered on his backside into the corner of the shelter, breathing through his mouth, straining to see, to hear. The slithering moved again. He thought toward him at first, and terror took him, stopping his breathing. He felt he could see a low, dark form, a bulk in the darkness, a shadow that lived, but now it moved away. Slithering and scraping, it moved away, and he saw, or thought he saw, it go out of the door opening. He lay on his side for a moment, then pulled a rasping breath in and held it, listening for the attacker to return. When it was apparent that the shadow wasn't coming back, he felt the calf of his leg, where the pain was centered and spreading to fill the whole leg. His fingers gingerly touched a group of needles that had been driven through his pants and into the fleshy part of his calf. They were stiff and very sharp on the ends that stuck out, and he knew then what the attacker had been. A porcupine had stumbled into his shelter, and when he had kicked it, the thing had slapped him with his tail of quills. He touched each quill carefully. Then the pain made it seem as if dozens of them had been slammed into his leg, but there were only 8, pinning the cloth against his skin. He leaned back against the wall for a minute. He couldn't leave them in. They had to come out. But just touching them made the pain more intense. So fast, he thought. So fast things change. When he'd gone to sleep, he had satisfaction, and in just a moment, it was all different. He grasped one of the quills, held his breath, and jerked. It sent pain signals into his brain in tight waves, but he grabbed another, pulled it, then another quill. When he had pulled 4 of them, he stopped for a moment. The pain had gone from being a pointed injury pain to spreading in a hot smear up his leg, and it made him catch his breath. Some of the quills were driven in deeper than others, and they tore when they came out. He breathed deeply twice, then let half of the breath out and went back to work. Jerk, pause, jerk, and 3 more times before he lay back in the darkness, done. The pain filled his leg now, and with it came new waves of self-pity. Sitting alone in the dark, his leg aching, some mosquitoes finding him again, he started crying. It was all too much, just too much, and he couldn't take it, not the way it was. I can't take it this way, alone with no fire and in the dark. And next time it might be something worse, maybe a bear. It wouldn't be just quills in the leg, it would be worse. I can't do this, he thought, again and again. I can't. Brian pulled himself up until he was sitting back upright back in the corner of the cave. He put his head down on his arms across his knees, with stiffness taking his left leg, and cried until he was cried out. He did not know how long it took, but later he looked back on this time of crying in the corner of the dark cave and thought of it as when he learned the most important rule of survival, which was that feeling sorry for yourself didn't work. It wasn't just that it was wrong to do or that it was considered incorrect. It was more than that. It didn't work. When he sat alone in the darkness and cried and was all done with it, nothing had changed. His legs still hurt. It was still dark. He was still alone, and the self-pity had accomplished nothing. At last he slept again, but already his patterns were changing, and the sleep was light, a resting doze more than a deep sleep, with small sounds wakening him twice in the rest of the night. In the last doze period before daylight, before he awakened, finally with the morning light and the clouds of new mosquitoes, he dreamed. This time it was not of his mother, but of his father at first, and then of his friend Terry. In the initial segment of the dream, his father was standing at the side of a living room looking at him, and it was clear from his expression that he was trying to tell Brian something. His lips moved, but there was no sound, not a whisper. He waved his hands at Brian, made gestures in front of his face as if he were scratching something, and he worked to make a word. With his mouth, but at first Brian could not see it. Then the lips made an shape, but no sound came. Ma. Brian could not hear it, could not understand it, and he wanted to so badly. It was so important to understand his father, to know what he was saying. He was trying to help, trying so hard, but when Brian couldn't understand, he looked cross, the way he did when Brian asked questions more than once, and he faded. Brian's father faded into a fog place Brian could not see, and the dream was almost over, or so it seemed to be, when Terry came. He was not gesturing to Brian, but was sitting in the park at a bench looking at a barbecue pit, and for a time nothing happened. Then he got up and poured some charcoal from a bag into the cooker, then some starter fluid, and he took a flick type of lighter and lit the fluid. Then, when it was burning and the charcoal was at last getting hot, he turned, noticing Brian for the first time in the dream. He turned and smiled and pointed to the fire as if to say, "See? A fire." It meant nothing to Brian except that he wished he had a fire. He saw a grocery sack on the table next to Terry. Brian thought it must contain hot dogs and chips and mustard, and he could think only of the food. But Terry shook his head and pointed again to the fire, and twice more he pointed to the fire, made Brian see the flames, and Brian felt his frustration and anger rise. And he thought, all right, I see the fire, but so what? I don't have a fire. I know about fire. I know I need a fire. I know that. His eyes opened, and there was light in the cave, a gray, dim light of morning. He wiped his mouth and tried to move his leg, which had stiffened like wood. There was thirst and hunger, and he ate some raspberries from the jacket. They had spoiled a bit, seemed softer and mushier, but still had a rich sweetness. He crushed the berries against the roof of his mouth with his tongue and drank the sweet juice as it ran down his throat. A flash of metal caught his eye, and he saw his hatchet in the sand where he had thrown it at the porcupine in the dark. He scooched up, wincing a bit when he bent his stiff leg, and crawled to where the hatchet lay. He picked it up and examined it and saw a chip in the top of the head. This nick wasn't large, but the hatchet was important to him. It was his only tool, and he should not have thrown it. He should keep it in his hand and make a tool of some kind to help push an animal away. Make a staff, he thought, or a lance, and save the hatchet. Something came then, a thought as he held the hatchet, something about the dream and his father and Terry, but he couldn't pin it down. Ah! He scrambled out and stood in the morning sun and stretched his back muscles and his sore leg. The hatchet was still in his hand, and he stretched and raised it over his head and caught the first rays of the morning sun. And that's where we're going to stop for right now. I want to do 3 vocabulary words, and then you'll be off to fill in the assignment. All right, so we have 3 vocabulary words that I'd like us to work on. They are wilderness, gingerly, and survival. So wilderness was on page 14. So let me go back to page 14. 1716. This should be 1514. All right, and wilderness should be on this page. I've already found it. I'll go ahead and look, see if you can find it. I'll give you a hint. It's near the top. All right, it is here. Wilderness. So it says, forced to crash land the plane, Brian suddenly finds himself alone in the Canadian wilderness with only a hatchet to help him survive. So let's talk about some words that are related to wilderness. Wilderness, you know, is out in the wild. Wild could be many different places. It could be the forest. It could be the desert, like with Night of the Spadefoot Toads, where Ben was from. It could mean the jungle. It could mean, so another way that we can say it is out in the country. And if it's like, not just like out in the country, like out by the apple orchards in Grand Rapids, but kind of more like deep into the forests, we call that the back country, where there are like no houses for miles and miles and miles and miles. We can also call it, some people might call it the boondocks. That just kind of means out in the wilderness, out where there are no people. No man's land is also another one. You might also hear them called wastelands, because sometimes when people get out into the wilderness and they don't have any resources, they kind of waste away to nothing. And then you might also hear people call the wilderness the sticks. Sticks, or another one like boondocks is the boonies. So just kind of depending on who you talk to, you might hear the wilderness called that. Let me connect all of these. Now, think about what kind of words would mean the opposite of wilderness. So I can think of one right away would be the city or town. Another one might be like the mall, right? I know the mall is in the city, but that would obviously mean the opposite. Another one that I'm going to put is zoo, because you'd see a lot of animals in the zoo, but it's not the wilderness. And then we'll say a town and city. Village is also not in the wilderness, where there would be a lot of people, a lot of stores. So I'll put my red box around that. And then what kind of word do you think this is? Adjective, adverb, noun. What are some other ones I'm thinking of? It is a place, right? Person, place, or thing. So it is a noun. And I'll make that nice and big. Noun. And underneath it, I'm going to put place, just so we don't forget. And then I need to put over here some words related to it. Well, the root word is wild. I could do wildly. It means like in a wild way. I think that's about it. That's all I can think of. So those are some related words to help you with the sentence, and then we need to come up with a sentence. So please do not copy my sentence when you write your sentence, but I was hunting in the wilderness and saw many deer. We'd have to hunt in the wilderness because that's where most of the deer are. And I will make it, there we go, make it a little bit bigger so you know that's my sentence. Please don't copy my sentence, but you should be able to come up with your own. So the wilderness is a place. You want to talk about something or someone being in that place. All right, the next word is gingerly. And gingerly was on page 15. So let me go back to page 15. It should already be there. Whoops, that's not what I meant to do. Yes, this is page 15. And if I remember correctly, it's at the top-ish. No, it's at the bottom. I found it. Go ahead and take a second to find it. All right, it is here, gingerly. It has ly on the end, so that should tell you right away what kind of word it is. But it says his fingers gingerly touched a group of needles that had been driven through his pants and into the fleshy part of his calf. So let's head back here. And gingerly, so he gingerly touched the needles where they had been driven into his calf. So this would mean carefully. It could also mean cautiously, delicately. So if you do something in a delicate way, you're doing it very, very carefully, very lightly. I'll put lightly. Notice all these are ending in ly. They're all the same type of word. Safely, in a safe way. This means in a ginger way. Ginger means careful, cautious, delicate, light, safe. It could also mean timidly. Timidly means, like if you've ever seen a cat that doesn't really want to be pet and it kind of shies away, that would be a timid cat. I could say shy. I could also say hesitantly. That means with hesitation. And I will add slowly. You don't want to do something, if you're doing something gingerly, you're probably not doing it very fast. So let me connect all of these, and you might want to start thinking of some opposite words. And if you came to the live lesson, I'm sure we did much better in the live lesson. You guys are like walking thesauruses, which is awesome. But some words that would mean the opposite would mean quickly, rushing, hard, aggressive, dangerously, oops, let me click back in. There we go. And let's put in one more. Let's do recklessly. I like that one. In a reckless way. So I'll put my red box around this because these are opposites. And then what kind of word do you think this is? Now we were saying it ended in ly, and there's one type of word that always ends in ly, and it's a word that describes a verb. So it is an adverb. Okay. Now it's describing the verb. The verb in the sentence was, if it's still highlighted, yes, his fingers gingerly touched. So the verb is touched, but how did he do it? He did it gingerly or very softly, very carefully, as to not cause more pain. And so I am going to write, the base word is ginger. And I think that's the only word we could put with it. Now, ginger is also a root, and ginger can also refer to the color red. So sometimes when you see a redhead, they might be called a ginger. Most gingers don't like that, but this is the base word for this one. All right, now I'm going to write my sentence. So this means in a careful or cautious way. So I gingerly set the 100-year-old vase on the table. So, you'd want to do that carefully because it might be very valuable or it could be very special to someone just because it's 100 years old. All right, great. Now we can move on to the last one. The last word is survival, and it's on page 17. Let me flip to page 17. I think that was 15. I think. Yes, perfect. Okay, so 17. Survival was also on that first page, but let's look it up here since that's where we wanted that, where the teacher's manual tells us we should, because it's in a longer sentence. So survival, I see it. All right, it is big on your screen now. I'll give you a second to look for it. All right, and it's right here. So the sentence says, it's all the way back at the very beginning of the paragraph. He did not know how long it took, but later he looked back on this time of crying in the corner of the dark cave and thought of it as when he learned the most important rule of survival, which was that feeling sorry for yourself didn't work. So survival here. What does survival mean here? And he's basically trying to stay alive, right? So that could be one of them, staying alive. To remain, alive, remain, stay, right? We could also say lived, and we could say endurance. If you are showing a lot of endurance, you're going through a lot, but you end up making it through. I could say that too, making it through. We could also say brave. A lot of times survival requires bravery. Could always do life threatening. Now, not all survival is life threatening. For example, like if somebody in your family has a baby, that baby is dependent on the adults for survival. Somebody needs to feed it, clothe it, make sure that things are the right temperature, take care of it when it's sick. Those aren't necessarily life-threatening, but some survival can be life-threatening, like Brian here, where he's out in the wilderness. Another one I could put is keeps. Oops. Stays. Perseveres. That's how you spell it. And not giving up. I'm actually going to move perseveres down over here because that's where my sentence goes. And then I'll just slide this over. Oops, this one and this one. Okay, perfect. So while I'm drawing some lines, start thinking of some antonyms or words that would mean the opposite. You think of one already. All right, so some opposite words might be death, finished, deceased, no longer, giving up. All giving up is the end of survival, but it could mean that. Dying. Those all fit in there. So let me put my red box around it since they are opposites or antonyms. And then what kind of word is this? Verb, adverb, adjective, pronoun, noun, preposition. Now I'm starting to remember them all. Okay, so this is a noun. Now this one's a little tricky. It's a noun. It's not a person. It's not a place. And it's not really a thing. It's definitely not a thing that you can hold on to, but this is kind of more of an idea. And remember how we've said ideas can also be nouns. So I'm going to put idea down here. And that's just to remind you that this is something that you have. You have this idea of survival in you when you're in a situation like Brian. All right, and then I need to put some related words. So we have survive is the base word. Survived. Surviving. Survival. I think that's it. That's all I can think of right now, so I hope that's it. I'll move those down right here. And then I need a sentence. For survival, the bear will have to fish in the river for food. Oops, for food. All right. So, whoa, what is happening? Wrong key is being hit. All right, so let me make that a little bit bigger for you. Now, please, 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 please don't copy my sentences. I think these vocabulary words today are easy enough for you to come up with your own sentences. So good luck and enjoy.